Hi everyone, welcome to the Atman Show, and we are going to talk about this book. This is called Mystic Universe, and we'll go in. I will have multiple series, and today in first series we are going to talk about only first two chapters. And Ashish Dalela, he's the author of this book. So, sir, can you go ahead and give a brief introduction before I begin my questions?
Yeah, my name is Ashish Talela. I've been writing on Vedic philosophy and light subjects for several years now. You can visit my website, shabda.co, shabda.co, and you'll find a lot of information there. So, with that, I turn it over to you, Anamika.
Okay, so we are talking about first two chapters. Chapter one is studying Vedic cosmology, and chapter two is introduction to Sankhya philosophy. So my first question is, what is the Vedic approach to cosmology?
See, cosmology is about two things, space and time. Okay. So, there is a different idea of space in Vedic cosmology and a different idea of time in Vedic cosmology. So, space, for example, is hierarchical. There are many levels of reality. And from each level, you can see certain levels. From the higher level, you can see the lower level. From the lower levels, you generally cannot see the higher level. So, by space, in modern science, you mean a three-dimensional box. But here in Vedic cosmology, space means many levels of spaces, right? So these levels of spaces are called loka, and so there are broadly 14 levels, seven below, seven above, and things like that. So similar, so space cosmology means space. Space is a different conception of space, which is hierarchical space. Similarly, time means cyclical. So, so time in modern science is linear, whereas time in Vedic cosmology is cyclical. So when we say what do you mean by cosmology, it is a study of space and time, and space is hierarchical and time is cyclical. But there is a completely orthogonal uh, reason why we study space and time in this way, and that is because uh, Vedic cosmology is studying space and time as the motion of the consciousness, as the movement of the consciousness. Okay, it is not about the movement of the body. So, hierarchical space means there are living entities at higher levels of the universe. And therefore, consciousness has a higher location. And similarly, there are living entities at the lower level, and therefore, consciousness is at the lower level. Now, the consciousness can go from lower level to higher level or higher level to lower level. Okay. So there is a motion across these levels, which is generally we call transmigration of the Atma or the Jiva. Uh, but even within a level, there is also transmigration. Okay. So even right now, every instant, every moment, the Atma is moving, but the body is not moving. So even if I move my hands or if I move my legs, I'm moving my lips right now. Okay. All these movements are the result of the movement of consciousness. And how the movement of consciousness creates the movement of the body is very involved in detailed science. Some of it is discussed in this book. Much of it is discussed elsewhere. Okay, so when we talk about cosmos, we are talking about a domain of tiers of reality in which the Atma moves up and down, inside and outside, round and round, anti-clockwise and clockwise. Okay, so there are six kinds of movements within this cosmos. It can go up, it can go down, it can go inward, it can go outward. It can go clockwise, it can go anti-clockwise. So based on the movement of the Atma, the body movement is created. But it is not just body movement, it can be mind movement, it can be sense movement, right? So for example, when I'm thinking something else, at that time also consciousness is moving, okay? If I'm not looking at the screen and looking at something else, at that time the senses are moving. Similarly, the intellect moves as we go from one belief system to another belief system. If I change my personality or sense of identity, at that time again the ego changes. So there are many kinds of movements happening beyond the movement of the body. Okay, and the movement of the consciousness is responsible for all of the other movements. It may not be my consciousness. Okay, that is one important thing to understand. There are many consciousness involved in moving everything. Okay. So for example, when the economy goes up, economy goes down, somebody is responsible. A consciousness is responsible, it is not my consciousness. So when we talk about Vedic cosmology, very simple thing, we want to study movements, many kinds of movements, economic movement, sociological movement, political movement, psychological movement, mental movement, sensual movement, body movement is just one of them. And all the possible ways in which we can move, there is a domain, there's a closed domain of experiences which we call the universe. Okay? So this is not the only universe. It's in fact described in Vedic cosmology that the present universe is the smallest universe. There are much bigger, much larger universes. Okay? So that is in a nutshell what is Vedic cosmology.
Yeah, so when you said transmigration, if a consciousness or if a soul is transmigrating from lower loka to higher loka, so is it like going into another body? Is that my understanding?
Yes, see, every moment to moment, we are going to a different body.
Okay.
The change is, for example, in the morning, your body is fresh, but in the evening or the night, the body is tired.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, around 10 o'clock, you're not hungry, but at 11 o'clock, you're hungry. So the
Mm-hmm.
body has gone from satiated body to a hungry body, from a excited body to a tired body. Okay, so the body is constantly changing. But because it goes in a cyclical way, therefore we think it's the same body. It is not the same body.
Oh,
Even your tiredness today is different from your tiredness yesterday and tiredness tomorrow. It may be slightly different. There is a difference. So there is always a body difference. Okay? So the consciousness is going to some extent in a cyclical way, but also in the cyclical way, it is moving forward. Okay? So it is always moving. So the body is always changing.
okay.
That Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Dehino asmin yatha dehe, Kaumaram Yauvanam Jara Tatha Dehantar Prapti Dhiras Tatra Namudya. So just like the Atma is moving in this body from childhood to youth to old age, similarly at the time of death, next body will be there. And the sober person is not bewildered by it. So there are two words here, Yatha and Tatha.
Mhm.
Yatha means just as, Tatha means in the same way. So in the same way that the body is changing in this life, similarly at the time of death. But you can go backwards even in that. Even in childhood, the body is changing. So childhood, youth, and old age are not like three states. Within childhood, there is adolescent, there is babyhood, and so on. Within each day, there are so many states. So the body is continuously changing, okay, and the consciousness is continuously moving. So it is not simply going from one loka to the other loka.
Okay.
Going from one loka to the other loka is a discrete big change.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Whereas, yeah, so
Mhm.
it looks like a very big change.
Mhm.
But in this life, it looks like small changes.
Okay.
But the principle is always the same. It is going one state to the other state to the other state. Just like you can be walking, take small steps, and then you can jump and take a big step. So walking and jumping look like different, but they're basically constant movement, continuously moving.
Okay. All right. Moving on to our next question. What is the Vedic view of the universe?
So the Vedic, by universe, we mean a domain of experiences. Okay. So we have to talk about different universes to understand what a universe means. So in each universe, so for example, in this universe, there is a limit to how much sense perception we can have. Okay. So for example, take color as an example. Some people can tell fine, minor differences in color. Some people cannot tell minor differences in color. But there is generally a limit to how much, how many types of colors we can understand. Similarly, there is a difference to, or there is a limitation to how many types of tastes we can experience. There's a difference in terms of how many types of touches we can have, or how much heat our body can tolerate. Okay. So each body is capable of certain finite number of experiences. Cannot, there is a range. Some people can go, but there is still a range, right? There is a limitation. We cannot go far beyond that range. And there are certain number of species which can experience these ranges. But in different universes, there are different species who have completely different kinds of experiences. Okay. Similarly, in a different universe, there are different kinds of interactions. So, for example, in this universe, we generally like to have cats and dogs as pets.
Yes.
Very few people will have snake as a pet. And but there are so many species that we can never have a pet, which means we cannot have relationships with those. In other universes, there are other species and more types of relationships. So what we mean by universe is a domain or limited domain of experiences, which means certain kinds of sensations, certain kinds of thoughts, certain kind of beliefs, certain kind of moral values, certain kind of relationships, certain kinds of emotions. So all this put together, one set is one universe. Another set is another universe. That other universe is not simply identical copy of this one. It is different in the sense that it accommodates more types of experiences. Okay, so they are staggered from small to big, which means the simplest of experiences are found in this particular universe. But if you go to a bigger universe, you will see more variety there. More types of pleasures, more types of sensations, more types of food, more types of relationships, more types of societies. Okay, and so on. So as you go on bigger and bigger and bigger, you get more and more complicated universe. So what is the Vedic view of universe? It is a type of experience. It's one domain of experience. Okay. And if there are more types of experiences, then it's a different.
So it was also said that when Vishnu ji sweats, then the more universe are created. Is that?
Yes, yes. So each universe. So we have to understand that there is this material world is like excreta of God. Okay. So there are certain things that God is not. Okay. It is excretion. So sweat is an excretion. So from this sweat, so this is very early on understood, right? That, sweat is not something nice. But the whole universe is created from this not so nice thing. Okay. And this is, so what is, so this, he performs certain certain he goes into a certain yoga, posture, and then he sweats. And from that, in that sweat, just like if we sweat, there are many bacteria.
Oh my God. So we are bacteria.
Basically, yeah, each universe is like that.
Oh my God. Okay. All right.
Yes, so because, yes, and that is there because the living entity that comes into this material world is a living entity that wants to be independent and separate from God. Understand? So why God has excreted us? Because we wanted to be independent. We wanted to be separate from God. And to take to the next level, why do we want to be separate? Because each person wants to become God. Somebody wants a lot of power so that he can prove that he is great. Somebody wants a lot of wealth, somebody wants a lot of knowledge, and so on. So everybody is trying to compete with God, prove that they are godly or they have become God by their endeavor. Okay. So God is not God because of endeavor. It is not that he performed some yoga, some tapasya, some mantra jap, and then he became God. He was always God. But the living entity wants to become like God. And therefore, God says, okay, you're out of my system now. You understand? So once you are out of the system, then you can try experimental activity and see. And if you can become God. So everybody is trying to become God.
Okay.
But the situation is overall compared like, the universe is created from the sweat. Yes.
Okay. All right, moving on to our third question. What is the problem in parallax method according to Vedic cosmology?
Okay. See, parallax method, for those who might not know, okay, we have two eyes.
Yeah.
And we measure distance to a single object.
Yes.
Okay. And once we get that distance, we have a projection backward, and then from that we get a size and a distance, estimation of distance. Okay. Now, if you have experienced, you wear glasses, get a new kind of glass. If you wear, then you feel that the same things that were closer may appear a little further, or they may get closer. Okay. And most of the time, people who make glasses will know that both the eyes are not the same. The power in one eye is different.
Yeah.
Cylinder in one eye is different. The sphere in other eye is different, and so on. Okay. Now, in the parallax method, you assume both the eyes are the same. And basically, we wear glasses and so on to do correction to bring them to the same level. Okay. And so what happens in cosmological measurement, let's say, for example, the Earth is supposedly going around. So you make a measurement when the Earth is in one sign, and then it goes 180 degrees into the other sign. Then you make another measurement. So this is like two eyes, like the left eye and the right eye. I don't know if you can see my hands. So when you do a parallax measurement, you assume that the measuring instrument, namely the eyes, are the same. The instrument with which you are measuring is also the same. This is the problem. Okay. Where does this sameness comes from? It comes from a very old scientific assumption that the universe is uniform. All the places in the universe are uniform. All the locations are the same. All the times are the same. But all the times are not the same. All the locations are also not the same. Okay. But this is an assumption in science. Similarly, they assume that all the instruments are the same. Okay. All the eyes are not the same. So how can all the instruments be the same? But it is an axiomatic assumption in science that all the instruments are the same. I mean, whichever are being used to measure parallax, all the locations are the same, all the times are the same. So if Earth has gone 6 months from one sign to the other sign, in that time the Earth has changed its location, 6 months have passed, and many transformations have occurred. But parallax method operates on the assumption that nothing has changed.
Okay.
Okay. So this is a fundamental problem.
What is
Similarly, let me complete that answer. So what is the problem? Similarly, in 6 months' time, the object that you are measuring is also changed. The star or the planet that you're measuring is also changed. Again, science assumes that that object has remained unchanged. So not only are your senses and your instruments of observation changing, the reality that you are measuring is changing. The time has a different effect as it goes on, it passes, that causes changes. Similarly, locations are not the same. So locations have changed, times have changed, objects, observers have changed, and the thing that you're measuring is changed. To say that all this change amounts to nothing or it cancels itself out is the problem. Okay. Sometimes the change may be small, sometimes the change may be big. Okay. But if you, then it is effectively like saying one eye has a different cylinder, different sphere, other eye has different sphere. Naturally, the distance measurement will be twisted. You will say that things are in this left direction or in the right direction, or they're closer or they're farther. Okay. Similarly, there are fundamental problems with quantum mechanics. Okay. In quantum mechanics, what happens is light is not emitted uniformly. Okay. There is a probability distribution. But fundamentally, nobody can say that photons will come at a constant rate. Okay, let's say 10 photons per second. Nobody can say that 10 photons per second will come. Okay, so when the photon emission rate changes, then you say that the light intensity being measured by the detector has changed. Okay, because if the photon emission rate goes faster, then more light is received. You interpret that more light as higher intensity of light. Higher intensity of light is then inferred to mean a smaller distance to the star. Because if the star is nearby, okay, then it seems brighter. If the star is further, then it seems lighter. Okay, brighter versus what is the opposite of bright is darker. Right? Dark star appears darker or brighter. What is happening? The star may not have moved. Simply the rate of emission of photons to this particular observer at this particular time at this particular location can have changed, which is always permitted by quantum mechanics. Right? So if the rate of emission of photons changes, the intensity of light changes, the inferred distance changes. Okay. So there are so many problems in assuming, but if you look at physics, they will assume emission is always constant. The nature of the body being measured is constant. All the locations in the space are the same. All the moments in the time are the same. And all the observers or instruments being used by science are not changing with time or place, and they are all the same.
Okay, thank
you.
So
these things are basic, fundamental flaws. But, these flaws are inbuilt assumptions in science, right? Because science operates on certain axioms. What we are saying is the axioms are themselves false, but they are axioms in science.
Yeah, but in the school, everybody is reading the theories, and we read it. Our kids we are going to read it. So they're all theories are made on assumptions. That's what you're saying.
Yeah. Even if you read, class 5, this thing, they'll draw space as a line. Okay. In that line, there'll be one equidistant numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But who told you it is equidistant? That is also an assumption.
Yeah.
Right? Space, in fact, we know in advanced theories of physics, we know that space can be contracted. Space can be expanded. Okay. Which means if the space is contracted, the body will move slower and slower and, it will move slowly. But because it moves slowly, you will think that the same time has elapsed than if it moves faster in an elongated space. Okay. So, for example, if I have to go from destination, from my home to, let's say, a shop.
Exactly.
Okay. And the distance to the shop increased. But I am now running to the shop. And earlier I used to take 5 minutes. Now I am taking the same 5 minutes, but earlier I was running. Earlier I was not running, but now I am running. So the time taken is the same. And if you don't know that this thing has changed, What will you say? I'm going to divide my, there is no other measure of speed, independent measure of speed other than distance. So if you don't know the distance has changed, you will always say that it took the same time, therefore the distance. So this is the fundamental problem, is we do not have an independent measure of anything. Okay, I cannot independently measure. For example, if you look at how distance is measured today, okay, the way of measuring distance is speed of light multiplied by time. Assumption being speed of light is constant. But how do you know speed of light is constant? When you are measuring distance based on speed of light, and if speed of light changes, you will measure again, or you will calculate the distance based on assuming that, let's say, speed of light became half. Okay, so the distance will be speed of light times the moment elapsed. And if the speed of light becomes half the distance will be equal to the previous distance.
Yeah.
Okay. So there is no way of independently measuring anything in science. Everything is a circular measurement. Whether if it is space, if I can assume that I can say the meter is a constant, but we don't know if it is constant. Speed of light is constant. We don't know if it is constant. A clock, is it running faster or slower? We don't know. But we are assuming that they are all constant, because without that assumption, we have no way of doing any science. And those assumptions are not true, right? We know that if we replace those instruments with observers, okay, all the moments in time are not the same. The distance measurement is not the same. Things are not running at a constant speed. So these assumptions in science are all creating a sense of numbers and numbers and numbers. But the foundation is that none of these things can be guaranteed to be constants. So this is the basic problem of measurement.
Okay. All right. Moving on to our next question. What is Sankhya philosophy?
Sankhya is, Sankhya is, it's a very long discussion to have, but very simple way of describing it is, let's say I have two fingers.
Yeah.
Okay. To say that there are two fingers, there is a first finger, second finger. There are four steps involved in this. Okay. First step is that I have to distinguish between finger one and finger two. I should have been able to say that these two things are not the same thing. Okay. Then I have to say each thing is a finger. Okay. Then I have to say this is first and this is second, or this is first, this is second. Okay. Then I have to count in some order. Then I can give the label 1. Okay. So there are four steps. First step is to distinguish that there are, some different things. Then to say that each thing is one thing. Okay. Because I could split this further into say that, oh, let me not count two fingers. Let me divide this into molecules, and there are, 1 billion molecules here, 1 billion molecules here. I have to say this whole thing is one thing. Then only I can count. Okay. So I'm making a choice in saying these two are distinct things. Then I'm making a choice in saying this thing is just one thing. One finger is one thing. Then I'm making a choice. I'll count from left to right. Then I'm saying this is 1 and this is 2. So 4 steps are involved. Okay. So this is there in every counting. So what Sankhya is about is how to distinguish, how to identify, how to sequence. Okay. So Sankhya means number. Number is a byproduct. 1 and 2 is a byproduct of 3 previous steps of distinguishing, identifying, and sequencing. Okay. So what are the different ways of distinguishing? Yes. So Sankhya will say, oh, you can distinguish by taste, by touch, by smell, by sound, by sight. Similarly, you can distinguish by saying this is true and false. You can say this is better, that is worse. Okay. So These are all the methods of distinguishing. Then you can say, how do you identify? You can say, oh, there are concepts such as finger. Or we can say there's a concept like nail and skin. Then this is no longer one thing. It is two things, nail and skin. Because I've used two different concepts. But if I use the concept finger, then it is one thing. If I use nail and skin, it is two different things. So what are all the ways of identifying? There are concepts. Then what are all the ways of sequencing? Something is better than something else. Okay. I can say counting from left to right is better. Somebody can say counting from right to left is better. Counting from this side is better. Counting from that side is better. So what are all the ways of distinguishing, identifying, and sequencing? A combination of these methods or all these things is Sankhya. Okay. So you see some, for example, a glass. Okay. A glass has been constructed by the combination of these methods of distinguishing, identifying, and sequencing. Right? If those methods of distinguishing, identifying, and sequencing have changed, then this thing won't be a glass. It may be a bottle.
Yeah.
It may be something else. It may be a paperweight. It may be a weapon. It may be a toy. Okay. So all the ways of distinguishing, identifying, sequencing, this is the combination. Okay. So distinguishing is basically the sensations. Identifying is all the concepts. And sequencing is all the judgments. So you can say sensations, concepts, judgments, or you can say perceptions, conception, and judgment. So all our experience can be divided into three parts: perceptions, conceptions, and judgments. And these are the counterparts of all the ways we can distinguish, identify, and sequence. And from this capacity of perception, conception, and judgment comes out, the combination of these things produces the world. Okay. So Sankhya is talking about how the world was created.
Yeah.
And simple answer is, well, in this world, I can see different things. I can count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But Sankhya says, oh, let us dig into the foundations of numbers. How did you get two things? Why not three? Why not four? How many could there be? So how are numbers constructed? You can say Sankhya is the foundations of mathematics or foundations of numbers. It is basically how to construct numbers from more elementary constructs. Okay. And once you can construct the numbers, then you can construct everything. Right? Because that number that is coming out, the 10th thing, the 10th thing is not the 10th thing, it is yet another finger. I have counted it as 10th thing, but it could be 10 people, 10 houses, 10 trucks, 10 cars. 10 is meaningless. Okay. In a given context where I have used certain specific methods of distinguishing, identifying, and sequencing, I've got the number 10. That 10 is bound to that context. It is 10 cars. It is not simply 10. It is 10 fingers. It is 10 houses, 10 trees. Okay. So 10 is by itself meaningless. All the time we talk about 10, it has to be in the context of something.
Okay.
And if we are not able to identify, we can say 10 persons. That person can be a dog, tree, cat, anything. So the fundamental unit of divisibility is a person. Okay, so you can say one person, that is fine. But that person is sometimes covered as a cat, sometimes covered as a dog, sometimes covered as a human, sometimes covered as a tree. So when it is covered, or when you count, you're counting based on the covering, not what is underlying the covering. So how that thing is covered, how you distinguish, identify, and sequence, that is Sankhya.
Thank you so much. Moving on to our last question. What is the scientific knowledge of material tree? Basically, what is the tree of material knowledge and how is it related to science?
So space, so what we mean by space, okay? If you start drawing all the concepts, so we talked about Sankhya, okay? We said there are certain ways of distinguishing, identifying, and sequencing. So distinguishing is at the bottom, okay? Taste, touch, smell, sound, sight. Within sight, there'll be color, shape, size. Within touch, there'll be hardness, heat, roughness. Within sound, there'll be pitch, tone, syllable, and so on. So this is a diversifying tree. Okay. So if I try to describe, for example, a cup, okay, at the top is the word cup. From that is all the ways the cup can be seen, all the ways the cup can be touched, the cup hard or soft, is the cup round or square, is the cup yellow or white or red, is the cup big or small, is the cup heavy or light, is the cup hot or cold. Okay, so there is one cup, but from the cup is emanating lot of branches. Okay, similarly, from each of the branch emanates more and more branches. Okay, if you say it is yellow, but it could be chrome yellow or lemon yellow or beige yellow.
Yeah.
Right? If you say it is, hot, it could be, it is hot, but we have to, or if you say it is hard, where you can say relative to what? Right? It is hard relative to a metal object, or is it hard relative to cotton? So we have to say, or if you say it is so in this way, this whole thing branches and diversifies, a lot. Similarly, if you say it is cup, it is fine, but uh, what is the cup used for?
Yeah.
You can say drinking, okay? So, but you can also drink not just from a cup, but from a glass, or from a bottle, or from a jar, or from a bucket. So, above this cup is what are all the possible ways in which things to be used. That use then gives rise to things like for example, you have higher level concepts like vehicle. Okay. Then scooter is a vehicle, motorcycle is a vehicle, car is a vehicle, truck is a vehicle, bus is a vehicle. Basic function is transportation, but it can be done in many ways. So transportation or vehicle is a more abstract concept than car, right? So in this way, when we construct the conceptual hierarchy, we get an inverted tree. Remember, we are talking about Sankhya, all the ways to distinguish, all the ways to identify, and all the ways to sequence. Okay, so this is the hierarchy in which first of all comes sequencing, then comes identifying, then comes distinguishing. Okay, so each individual person is created and then they grow up and say, oh, I am man, I'm not a woman. I'm not a man. I'm not this. This not is coming much later, which is distinguishing. Identifying comes before that. Okay. And even before identifying comes a judgment. What is true, what is right, what is good. It's a very complicated subject. But basically, by the combination of these three things, a hierarchy is created. This hierarchy is the material tree. Okay. And the Atma is moving on this material tree one step at a time. And sometimes it takes a big leap, sometimes it takes a small step. Sorry, I'm running flu today.
Thank you for anyways doing it for me. Okay, thank you, Ashish. It was an amazing session. And again, we are going to meet as you decided, we may have a 6 episode series, and next time we'll meet for chapter 3 and chapter 4. Do you have anything
Okay.
to say to my viewers of the Atman Show?
Study Vedic texts as if they were science. Okay, do not study it as poetry or literature or history and things like. It is also poetry. It is also literature. It is also historical. But if you treat it as poetry, literature, and history, you will treat it as something that existed in the past, but it is not relevant at the present. It will not transform your life. It will just remain a cultural artifact that you put it in your bookshelf and feel good about it.
Okay.
Okay. So if you want, my recommendation is study it as science. Study it as knowledge that is about the world around you, about yourself, and about the nature of truth and reality. If you study it like that, then it will transform your life. Otherwise, it will simply be a source of cultural pride, national pride, historical pride, racial pride, whatever. It's not going to be transformative in any way. So my recommendation is to uh, study everything as science. So my website is also called Advancing the Scientific Study of Philosophy.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Namaste. Bye.
Namaste.